An elderly woman of color never anticipated that a serene afternoon in the park would transform into a nightmare when two aggressive police officers abruptly accused her without justification before she could offer her side. She was thrown to the ground, handcuffed, and handled harshly. But the narrative doesn't conclude there. Just when it appeared that injustice had peaked, a bystander intervened. And that individual was none other than the legendary Mike Tyson. What transpires next will leave you astonished. Stay tuned to see how bravery and kindness can shift the balance against injustice. Don't forget to subscribe to our channel and let us know where you're tuning in from in the comments. Your support will enable us to share more impactful stories like this one. Mike Tyson, the iconic former boxer, often visits Greenwood Park every afternoon after his training sessions to unwind and enjoy the serene ambiance. With a tumultuous past and a celebrated career, Mike values these peaceful moments in his daily routine. It's where he steps away from the spotlight, sheds the burdens of fame, and finds equilibrium for his spirit. That afternoon, as he strolled leisurely along the tree-lined path, he inadvertently heard shouting from a bench near the pond. He paused, his keen eyes scanning for the source of the commotion. There, two police officers, Blake and Carter, were loudly confronting an elderly woman. She sat on a stone bench, looking frail and small. Just as she began to speak, one of the officers seized her arm and forcefully pulled her, causing her to lose her balance and fall to the ground. Mike didn't know who she was, but the scene ignited a fire within him. The elderly woman, with her graying hair and fearful gaze, reminded him of powerless moments from his past when he was belittled due to his background and circumstances. Anger surged as he watched Blake continue to handcuff her roughly, despite her quaking attempts to explain. A few park-goers paused to observe, but no one dared to step in. Some pulled out their phones to record, yet everyone maintained their distance. Mike narrowed his eyes and moved swiftly toward them, thinking to himself, "I cannot let this continue." As he advanced, his eyes that once made the toughest opponents in the ring shudder, were filled with resolve. Mike halted for a moment, assessing the actions of the two officers, then calmly interjected, "Hey, what are you guys doing? She's just sitting on a bench. Is this how you uphold justice?" The two officers, initially oblivious to who he was, turned to him with irritation. Carter raised an eyebrow, his tone frosty. "It's none of your business. Step aside before you get into trouble." Mike inhaled deeply, keeping his tone steady yet assertive. This isn't how you treat an elderly person, especially when she's done nothing wrong. "Release her immediately." Blake smirked, turning to Carter. "Look, this guy thinks he's a hero. He doesn't even know who this old lady is." Carter scoffed, sizing Mike up. "We're police officers. We don't need outsiders telling us what to do. If you don't want trouble, you'd better leave." Mike clenched his fists but stayed composed. "You had." He understood that anger wouldn't resolve the situation, yet he was also clear that he wouldn't back down. He remained there, a symbol of strength, prepared to confront anything to defend this innocent woman. A familiar thought echoed through his mind. If I do nothing, who will stand up for her? Mike Tyson maintained his unwavering gaze, took another step toward the elderly woman, placing himself between her and the two officers. The elderly woman, with a worn face and handcuffs, looked up at Mike with eyes that were both frightened and hopeful. He leaned down and softly asked, "Are you all right? What did they do to you?" Before she could answer, Officer Carter snapped back with a challenging tone. "I already told you. Back off. You're obstructing law enforcement." Mike looked up, his gaze unwavering. "Obstructing what? You have no valid reason to detain her. You haven't even provided an explanation or any evidence. I can't stand by and watch you misuse your authority like this." Officer Blake took a step back, appearing uneasy as the crowd around them grew. Many had taken out their phones to record. However, he still attempted to uphold his bravado. "Listen, big guy, this isn't your concern. If you don't want trouble, you should leave before we have to use force." Mike stood tall, his voice deep and resolute. "I'm not someone you can intimidate. I'm here to defend her and stop you from doing wrong. Don't do anything you'll regret." At that moment, a few whispers arose from the crowd. "That's Mike Tyson. He's defending the old lady." Realizing the attention was directed at him, Officer Carter grew impatient. He lunged forward, trying to shove Mike aside. But to Carter's astonishment, Mike didn't move. Instead, he remained firm, his expression as cold as it was in the boxing ring. "I'm not going anywhere. If you want to explain, do it now. Otherwise, I suggest you let her go." Carter, with his typical arrogance, yelled loudly, "Who do you think you are? Just because you're famous doesn't give you the right to interfere with our duties." Mike chuckled softly, but his eyes remained sharp. "Who I am is irrelevant. What matters is that I won't let you continue treating an innocent person unjustly. Look around you. Everyone's recording what you're doing. Do you want this to go viral?" Blake glanced at the crowd, where some individuals had started chanting, "Let her go! Stop this abuse of power!" Carter still tried to act tough. "I don't care. You're obstructing the police, and that could land you in trouble." Mike gently leaned forward, locking eyes with Carter, his voice filled with authority. "I'm not afraid of trouble, especially when I'm doing the right thing. But you should be scared. What you're doing today won't just impact your careers, but will also destroy public trust in the entire police force." Mike Tyson continued to stand his ground, positioned between the elderly woman and the two officers. The surrounding crowd grew larger, the murmurs escalating into loud calls for justice. A young woman held her phone high, shouting, "They're abusing their power. Let her go right now." A middle-aged man stepped forward, eyes blazing with anger. "She's just sitting quietly on the bench. You have no grounds to arrest her." Officer Blake and Carter began to feel mounting pressure as all eyes turned toward them. Carter, still maintaining a harsh tone, yelled back, "All of you, back off! You're obstructing us from performing our job. If you don't disperse immediately, we'll arrest you for causing a disturbance." These threats only fueled the crowd's anger. An elderly woman among the crowd, her voice trembling yet determined, shouted, "No one is afraid of you. This isn't justice. This is abuse of power." Mike stood resolute, looking directly into Carter's eyes. He took another step, his voice commanding, "Let her go! Everyone here is watching. If you don't want this incident to ruin your careers, stop now." Carter glanced at Blake, looking baffled. But instead of halting, Blake firmly responded, "Put her in the car. We can't let them think we're intimidated." Carter nodded, advancing toward the elderly woman. But before he could act, Mike swiftly stepped in his way. The crowd erupted in cheers, their voices echoing. At that moment, from a distance, the sound of police sirens pierced the air. A patrol car arrived, and a middle-aged man with a stern expression stepped out. It was Lieutenant Taylor, Blake, and Carter's superior. He approached, his gaze scanning the crowd before focusing on Mike and the two officers. "What's happening here?" Taylor asked, his voice deep yet authoritative. Blake turned to Taylor, relief evident on his face. "Sir, we're trying to apprehend a suspect, but this guy has been obstructing and provoking the crowd." Mike stepped forward, looking directly at Taylor, his tone calm but assertive. They're not arresting a suspect. They're abusing their authority. She's just sitting quietly on a bench, not doing anything wrong." Instead of investigating, they resorted to violence, throwing her to the ground and handcuffing her without justification. Taylor looked at the elderly woman, who was still trembling, her eyes filled with fear. He turned back to Blake and Carter, asking, "Do you have any reason to arrest her? Any evidence or reports?" Blake stammered, "We thought she might be a suspect who escaped earlier this morning. We acted on instinct." Taylor raised an eyebrow, his gaze icy. "Instinct? Or are you simply looking for an easy target? I want to see your exact reports right now." Blake and Carter fell silent, unable to respond. Taylor turned to Mike. "Thank you, Mr. Tyson, for stepping in. I will take care of this immediately. Thank you for helping us uphold justice." Taylor then turned to order the two officers, "Immediately remove the handcuffs and leave this place. I will deal with you two later." Blake reluctantly removed the handcuffs from the elderly woman, while Carter backed away, looking uncomfortable. The crowd erupted in cheers. Someone shouted, "Mike Tyson is our hero." Mike didn't display excitement. He bent down gently, assisting the elderly woman up. "Are you okay? I'll ensure you're safe." The elderly woman nodded softly, tears streaming down her face. Mike helped her stand, guiding her out of the park amidst the crowd's cheers. But he knew this story was far from finished. As Mike Tyson helped the elderly woman sit down on a bench away from the scene, He turned back to face the crowd and Lieutenant Taylor. His eyes were no longer filled with just anger, but with determination and accountability. The crowd, though calmer, still awaited what would occur next. Mike stepped forward, his voice deep and resonant. Today we witnessed something that shouldn't happen. The abuse of power. An elderly woman who did nothing wrong was harassed and harmed by those who were meant to protect her. If you hadn't been here, would this have stopped? Would justice have been served? The crowd responded with supportive cheers. A man shouted, "We always see this happening, but no one ever stands up." Mike nodded, his eyes scanning the people around him. "That's why I can't stay silent. This isn't the first time events like this have occurred. But it must be the last time we allow it to happen without fighting back. I don't know this woman, but I know she didn't deserve to be treated this way, and I know we all have a duty to protect what is right." Lieutenant Taylor stepped forward, raising his hand to request silence. His voice resonated. "I understand your outrage. I'm a police officer too, and I'm ashamed to witness the actions of my two colleagues. What transpired today does not reflect the values of our force. I promise to conduct a thorough investigation and hold those accountable." Mike stepped closer, his sharp eyes meeting Taylor's. "Promises are good, but actions speak louder. I hope you follow through on your words, not only to address these two officers, but to examine the entire system that allowed such behavior to persist." Taylor paused for a moment, then nodded. "You're right. I will personally oversee this investigation. Abuse of power will not be tolerated under any circumstances." Mike turned back to the crowd where all eyes remained on him. With the composure of a champion, he declared, "We can't allow incidents like this to carry on. The police aren't our adversaries, but those who misuse their power within the force need to be removed. Today we stood up together, but continue to uphold this unity, not just to protect the vulnerable, but to ensure that no one has to live in fear." Applause erupted from the crowd. A young woman raised her phone, filming and proclaiming loudly, "Mike Tyson isn't just a legendary boxer. He's a hero of justice." A middle-aged man shouted, "We stand with you, Mike! Justice must be served!" Mike turned back to assist the elderly woman in standing. She was still trembling, but her eyes were less fearful. She looked at Mike, her voice raspy. "Thank you, young man. I didn't know what would happen without you." Mike smiled gently, his voice full of reassurance. "No need to thank me, ma'am. I was just doing what anyone should do." He slowly led her out of the park while the crowd remained, some continuing to film and comment. Mike understood that his actions today were merely a small step, but they had instilled hope in the hearts of those who witnessed. For him, protecting justice wasn't the duty of one individual, but of the entire community. As Mike departed, Taylor turned back to Blake and Carter, his tone growing colder. "You two better be prepared. This won't be overlooked. You've brought shame to our entire police force." Carter tried to protest, but Taylor raised his hand to silence him. "I don't want to hear any excuses. We will address this properly. Now leave this place immediately." Blake and Carter, now stripped of any pride, reluctantly exited the park under the scornful gazes of the crowd. Mike Tyson, on his way to ensure the elderly woman returned home safely, pondered what had just transpired. He recognized that he wasn't the one to overhaul the entire system, but today's small action had made a significant impact. And that's how change begins, through a courageous action, a decision not to remain silent in the face of injustice. As Mike Tyson left with the elderly woman, the incident in the park quickly spread across social media, thanks to the videos recorded by the crowd. In a matter of hours, images and footage showcasing the two officers abusing their authority, along with Mike Tyson's stand for justice, became the focal point of public attention. Public pressure compelled the police department to take swift action. Lieutenant Taylor decided to suspend officers Blake and Carter pending an investigation. An independent investigation team from the Department of the Interior was established to thoroughly assess the officers' actions and the shortcomings within the management system. The investigation team quickly gathered evidence, including videos from the crowd, testimonies from Mike Tyson and Mrs. Martha Johnson, and previous records of Blake and Carter. The crowd's videos clearly depicted the elderly woman sitting quietly on the bench with no suspicious behavior, while the two officers utilized unnecessary force by throwing her to the ground and handcuffing her. Testimonies from Mrs. Martha and Mike Tyson further substantiated the evidence of the officers' brutality and negligence. The investigation also revealed that Blake and Carter had multiple prior complaints regarding abuse of power. But these complaints had often been overlooked or dismissed. Small protests occurred outside the police station, with banners demanding justice and police reform. The media consistently reported on the incident, and Mike Tyson became the voice for the vulnerable. In an interview, he expressed that those without a voice need protection, not threats. Mike's words stirred public sentiment, and human rights organizations joined in applying pressure, demanding transparent answers from the police department. Blake and Carter were summoned to appear before an internal disciplinary committee. Blake tried to defend himself, asserting that they were simply doing their duty and acted quickly to ensure public safety. However, the scene's videos contradicted this defense. The committee pointed out that they had no specific evidence related to Mrs. Martha and Proye had bypassed all basic verification protocols. Carter attempted to plead for clemency, but Lieutenant Taylor emphasized that opportunities had been given multiple times before and that their actions had eroded public trust in the police force. Ultimately, the disciplinary committee decided to dismiss Blake and Carter for abuse of power and serious violations of professional ethics. Their records were forwarded to the Department of Justice for potential criminal charges concerning unlawful use of force and human rights violations. This decision was publicly announced, and the police department committed to reforms aimed at preventing similar incidents in the future. When asked about this outcome, Mike Tyson remarked that it was a step in the right direction. He hoped it would convey a strong message to all who misused their power, that the era of silence had come to an end. Mike continued to engage in community initiatives, advocating for reform and utilizing his influence to foster change. For him, this incident wasn't merely a confrontation in the park, but a reminder that justice must always be defended, regardless of who takes a stand for it. The event in the park, and Mike Tyson's assertive actions, became a catalyst for a wave of transformation within the police system. Under public pressure and Lieutenant Taylor's commitment to reform, the police department initiated a comprehensive renewal plan to restore community trust. Lieutenant Taylor announced that all officers would participate in mandatory training programs on professional ethics, cultural awareness, and nonviolent crisis intervention skills. These lessons reinforced that the role of the police is not to dominate, but to protect and serve the community. A new complaint handling system was implemented, allowing citizens to report abuse of power anonymously. All complaints would be meticulously reviewed and independently investigated by an external committee to ensure transparency. Officers were encouraged to report colleagues who engaged in misconduct without fear of retaliation. Mike Tyson, though not an official member of the police force, became a strong proponent of these reform efforts. He frequently appeared at community meetings, sharing his story and urging individuals to persist in the fight for justice. In a speech before a crowd, he declared, "This isn't just about an elderly woman in a park. This is about all of us, about a system that needs to change. If we don't stand up, who will?" Each one of us has a role in building a fairer community. Mike's presence at community meetings not only inspired, but also attracted media attention, keeping the issue of reform at the forefront. He emphasized that real change requires time and perseverance, but it can only be achieved if everyone collaborates. The changes began to yield notable results. Younger officers, especially newcomers, exhibited a stronger commitment to fostering relationships with the community. Numerous community police interaction programs were organized, facilitating better understanding and breaking down biases on both sides. Officers participated in meetings at schools, churches, and neighborhoods to listen to the concerns and perspectives of the public. Mrs. Martha Johnson, the woman who had been a victim in the park incident, became a symbol of the fight for justice. She joined community meetings alongside Mike Tyson, sharing her experience and urging people not to remain silent in the face of injustice. The story of Mike Tyson and Mrs. Martha didn't only impact the city where the incident took place, but resonated nationwide. It became a symbol of unity, demonstrating that one individual can create significant change by standing up against injustice. On social media, hashtags like Justice for Martha and Stand with Mike evolved into movements encouraging individuals to share their own stories of facing injustice and advocating for what is right. Mike continued his role as a leader in reform movements. He not only championed changes within the police system, but also motivated educational and community organizations to develop programs that help youth understand the values of fairness and respect. Mrs. Martha, now recovered both physically and emotionally, embraced a more peaceful life, always safeguarded and respected by the community. She often reflected, "That day I thought I wouldn't see another tomorrow, but Mike intervened, and thanks to him, I regained my faith in people and justice." The narrative of Mike Tyson and Mrs. Martha serves as a testament to the power of courage and unity. It illustrates that regardless of how challenging the situation, justice will prevail if someone is willing to stand up for what is right. Changes in the system cannot occur instantly, but with each action and every voice, a fairer society can be constructed. Mike, reflecting on the events, felt no pride in his fame or accomplishments. What brought him the most satisfaction was not turning away when confronted with injustice, doing the right thing, and knowing that his small action had given hope to many. He smiled, continuing his path in the pursuit of justice, aware that this was merely the beginning of what lay ahead. The story of Mike Tyson and Mrs. Martha is not only a testament to individual bravery, but also a symbol of community strength when confronting injustice. It reminds us that in a world often filled with unfairness, even a minor action can create a substantial impact. Regardless of who you are, where you are, or what you do, you can always play a part in improving society. We learn that justice doesn't exist naturally, but needs to be actively protected and fought for daily. Through unity, trust, and perseverance, everyone can contribute to crafting a world where compassion, fairness, and respect are consistently prioritized. If this story resonated with you, share it to spread this uplifting message to more individuals. Don't forget to click the subscribe button on our channel so you won't miss more inspiring and impactful life stories. Let's create change together starting today.